Hey, I just want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. I wrote this song when I was down and just feeling heartbroken down in Florida, down in the swamps and in the bayous, and I was really just on one, and I was on a 3 or 4 day bender, and I was reminiscing about my sweet pineapple princess that had left me at the time. So, I get a little teary-eyed every time I think about it. But I appreciate all y'all coming out here on this open mic night to check me out here at the bowling alley. Without further ado, I'll get right into it. Every little thing there's some heat. Oh, the high cost of the pineapple flip, and no pineapple takes your hand. I feel you, pineapple sun. Take control, just take control. I feel I got pineapple kiss. Oh, I feel I got a pineapple kiss. Ear candy, pineapple rainbow, like a pineapple rainbow. Now answer me, I love Florida. Pineapple fruits and the scents in the swamp. Fair weather's nice, but I want more. Sing and laugh to the ocean on a crowded beach in the pineapple storms. Pineapple storms. I feel I got a pineapple kiss. I feel I got a pineapple kiss. Ear candy and the pineapple rainbow, like a pineapple rainbow. I can take you to a pineapple or an island anywhere. I can take you to a pineapple or an island anywhere. And I say, I feel I got a pineapple kiss. So I feel I got a pineapple kiss, and I know your candy, pineapple rainbow, like a pineapple rainbow, like a pineapple rainbow, like a pineapple rainbow. Thank you very much. My name is Pineapple Jim. Check out my MySpace and all my social medias. Till next time. Bless to you, Bowling Alley.
Thoughts. Analogue thoughts.
Analogue thoughts.
Analogue thoughts. Analogue thoughts.
Analogue thoughts. Analogue thoughts. Analogue thoughts.
Episode 2. We're doing it. Welcome to the second episode of Analogue Thoughts. I'm happy that you could be here to share the experience. And if you joined us for episode 1, thank you for dialing into those frequencies and getting in here on the first episode. I really appreciate that. On this episode, well, first, I'm your host, Steven, aka Mount Analog. And on the podcast, the sort of format that I've decided to run with is I take questions from the internet. People on the internet submit questions of like really anything, ideas or thoughts or just questions they want me to answer on the podcast, and then I field those questions. So if you have something you want to hear me discuss on the podcast or talk about, or it could literally be any subject too. We're trying to just keep the door open with it, like art, music, movies, philosophy, just anything, biology. So I'm trying to keep an open mind with I'm trying to keep an open mind in terms of what type of questions I'll accept. You can hit me up on any of the socials, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, all that stuff at Mount Analogue, MT period ANALOGUE. So if you've got a thought or you've got a question or you've got an idea, send them on over there. And this is episode 2. Things are still evolving. Things are still mutating. Things are changing. I'm still working out how exactly I want things to roll. But for the foreseeable future, that's how we're going to do it. You send the question, I answer the question. I've got some other types of things planned for the podcast as well for the future. But like I said, this is episode 2. And today's been pretty cool. My sister works at an assisted living facility, and once to twice a month, they'll like hire me to come and play music for the people that live there. And it's really cool because I get to like ask them what they want to hear songs about, and we'll like make songs together and stuff. It's really fun. I bring like my looper and keyboard and mandolin and guitar and stuff. And then, we just create things together. So that was my day. And then after that, I went swimming with my girlfriend and her mom and my 2-month-old son. And he's trying to figure out what the water is, like what the water does. And he's stoked about it. So I'm stoked that he's stoked about it. And so, yeah, I'm a little tired because it's been a busy day, but it's not been it's been all good things. I'm like not mentally drained, I'm just kind of physically like, soupy, but not necessarily in a bad way. It's a good soup. It's a spicy soup. One more thing before we dive into the questions. I do have a Patreon. So if you go to patreon.com and search for Mount Analogue, MT period ANALOGUE, you can, there's like different tiers of subscription. It goes from like $1 all the way up to like, I forget what I capped it at, like $30, but each tier you get like cool stuff every month in terms of like exclusive content or early access to content. And so, yeah, if you want to support, there's even like $1 tier if you just want to throw $1. Yeah, I've done that before on Patreon too. It's a cool way, even beyond me. You don't have to do any of that for me. Just listening is enough for me. But it is a cool way to support artists, even like beyond myself. And a lot of people use it to like fund movies or fund projects and stuff like that. So if you aren't aware of Patreon and you are looking to be a patron for creators, it's a good place to go. I just put one up and I'm letting y'all know about it. So with all that, let's jump into this first question. It was sent over by Joshua Hebert over on my Mount Analogue Summit Facebook group. Sorry, I'm in a squeaky chair. So if you hear some squeaks, that's just me. Don't worry about that. So Joshua Hebert sends over the question over on the Mount Analogue Summit page. He says, "What is your take on secret societies?" And I think that this is a pretty large question with a lot of sources of information. And due to the nature of secret societies themselves, it can be kind of hard to distinguish fact from fiction sometimes, and just because of like the nature of secret societies themselves. So I tried to do my due diligence with this and find, as accurate information as I could find. But short answer to that question is, I think they're out there. I know that they're out there. And it can be kind of a gray area when you talk about secret societies, just based on like what the parameters of a secret society are. But like the dictionary, the actual definition of a secret society is an organization whose members are sworn to secrecy about their activities. So still doesn't necessarily quantify exactly what a secret society entails or like what all their activities consist of. So even by definition, it's kind of a gray area. And I kind of wrote down, when you dive a little deeper, there are agencies that operate in secrecy, but will still allow their presence to be known. And then if we operate on that pretense, there are a ton of secret societies, like the military, corporations and businesses, religions, cults. You only get access to what's going on if you join. They kind of like, they operate in the public sphere, but they have these sort of like secret going-ons behind the hood. And for this episode, I'm going to kind of stick to that premise, or that paradigm with it, is that I'm going to talk about the Knights Templar, because they're probably like the biggest secret society that has ever existed. And there's a lot of like public information about them, but there are also like, you know, books written about their goings on, like the goings on behind the scenes. So there's just there was a lot of information about them, and I thought that it was a cool starting point to jump in if you're looking to jump into secret societies, which I've done a little bit of research on them before, but I haven't taken quite the dive I took on this one. And I feel like, I just want to say, I feel like society kind of like functions upon secrecy in a pretty heavy way. Like online security, homeland security, all of the governments that operate in the world are kind of like secret societies. They're all like, and for good and bad as well. You know, it's like sometimes you don't want people to know what's going on because it's sensitive information. So I do get that, and I know that that is kind of where we get into the gray area of like, is it a secret society, or is it an entity that remains secret because the information that they have could be used in a nefarious way? So there's that too. I'm personally not a big fan of withholding information if it pertains to, you know, the progress of humanity. So I feel like if you are a secret society that operates on the pretenses that you're trying to make gains by withholding information from people, I don't really jive with that. It's not really my cup of tea. I don't think it's most people's cup of tea. I think there's a ton of secret societies making really big moves today that sort of operate behind the government, behind corporations. And by secret societies, I don't even necessarily mean, you know, like cloaked figures that meet on a full moon and like sacrifice a goat or any shit like that. I mean, like, there are secret societies that that just have like, they have gains to be made economically, so they keep things super secret, which I mean makes sense because business in general is a really like cutthroat thing. And if you're gonna like share all of the methods that you made all your money, people are gonna steal that information and just like use it to also make money and undermine your profits, I guess. So yeah, corporations, secret societies, are they the same? Kind of yeah, but kind of not. Once again, that sort of gray area. In Italy and Poland, it's actually illegal to have a political party that they have banned secret political parties and political organizations in their constitution. So they said, you know, obviously we don't want it. We want nothing to do with it. And I thought that was really interesting when I was doing my dive on secret societies. And also in my dive of doing secret societies, I got into all of like the collegiate ones, just like the ones that exist as fraternities and stuff like that. Obviously, some of the big ones are Skull and Bones, the Pit Club, the Scroll and Key. Skull and Bones and Scroll and Key are both at Yale. The Pit Club's at Cambridge. The Flat Hat Club, which is in Virginia at the College of William and Mary. So I thought, if you want to take a deep dive on collegiate secret societies, there's like a bajillion of them. And I almost went down that rabbit hole, but I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. The biggest one of those is probably Skull and Bones. There's been like a bunch of movies. I don't want to say a bunch, maybe like two or three movies made about them. And of course, like George Bush's affiliation with them and everything like that makes them a pretty high profile secret society. And I would be remiss if I were not to mention all of the conspiracy theories that are associated with secret societies. And I don't think that necessarily like conspiracy theories are all crackpot theories or like, I think conspiracy theories, just like that term in general, gets a really bad rap. But I think conspiracy theories are just that. They're theories about people they're theories about conspiracies. So a lot of times conspiracy theories wind up being true. And I think when we look at things like collegiate secret societies, and when we look at things like corporations, and we look at things like our military, a lot of the conspiracy theories people have about what is going on behind the scenes are more often than not true. So, question things. There are some really obvious conspiracy theories that have been at one time considered crackpot, but have been outed now, like UFOs. Like just in recent years, the government has come out and said like UFOs definitely exist, and they've shared and declassified tons and tons of information. And that's a conspiracy theory that has now just become fact. That's not even a conspiracy theory anymore. And there's a ton of stuff like that, like Agent Orange. Governments are spying on you. It's like we used to think like, oh man, I think it's weird. We're getting these ads on our phones, and like I think they're super catered to me. And now it's just like public knowledge that corporations and the government are spying on us via our smartphones. That's just those are just truth, like that's just truth. And then there's also conspiracy theories that lie like somewhere in the middle ground, like all of the 9/11 stuff obviously happened. To what extent the public was, to what extent we know exactly what happened is still super out on, the jury's still super out on that. JFK's assassination obviously happened. To what end to what were the devices creating that situation? People will debate that forever. The lunar landing, obviously we've been to the moon now. Was the first one real? Who's to say? And then there are the extreme conspiracy theories, which are like flat Earth. And I actually, when flat Earth happened, like when people like the Earth is flat, we like went back to that. I gave it a shot. I never bought it, but we used to think the Earth was flat. Like a long time ago, we were like, Earth's flat, so yeah. And then we discovered it wasn't flat, and people were getting like killed for saying that it was flat, or that it wasn't flat, sorry. And then it was just like believed for a really long time, it's a sphere. And now people are like, no, actually it's flat again. So it's like, if we got it wrong once, we could have got it wrong again. And so, but after looking at the numbers up, looking at the data, it doesn't quite add up. Flat Earth, nah. QAnon, I'm not even going to dive into that one on this one. It will get flagged. This podcast will get flagged. I'll just say medicines, mind control. I'll leave that at that. Simulation theory, which is an interesting theory. I don't even know if that falls into the category of like, I mean, I guess it does. Like simulation theory, if we were living inside of a simulation, wouldn't that be like the most grandiose conspiracy theory ever? As like, all of this is fake. All of this is, I don't know. It's interesting to think about. Like, what would be the reason for it? Why would we be inside of a simulation other than the pure I guess, like enjoyment or the pure fun for someone to like observe the simulation. I don't know. It's interesting. Maybe we are. Maybe, hey, you know what? Maybe we are inside a simulation. Probably. But anyway, I kind of got sidetracked there. So where am I going with this? There's a lot of theories. There's a lot of secrets. There's a lot of secret societies and their role in humanity and global politics. The truth of all of the conspiracies and secret society kind of like lands somewhere in the middle between the cracks. And, you know, I think that there are so many secret societies to dive into: the Illuminati, the Freemasons, the New World Order. But I decided, like I had said earlier before I completely derailed myself, I decided to dive into the Knights Templar. They 100% did exist. They operated in a public setting, but maintained secret activities and influence behind the scenes. So they were probably the most powerful secret society that has ever existed, that we can confirm existed, I guess. I'll say that. And a lot of modern conspiracy theories still include their influence in secret societies' creations, like the Freemasons and Illuminati and all that, still attribute like their roots to the Knights Templar, or like that there are people, ancestors of the Knights Templar, involved with their inception. So where did they come from? They came about during the Crusades, which the Crusades happened between 1095 and 1291. And it was when Europe was trying to take over Jerusalem. So the Knights Templar operated as an arm of the Pope throughout Europe and many parts of the world. And eventually they took Jerusalem in 1099. So we're talking about the Crusades. The Crusades, even more than just taking Jerusalem and taking Holy Lands, was kind of like, if it had crescendoed and gone on longer than it did, it was really kind of like a global domination sort of thing, where it was like imperialism here, we're going to go there, the Catholic Church is taking this over, the Pope is going here. And the Knights Templar sort of acted as a military force for the Pope, and sort of spearheaded the front lines of the Crusades. So once Jerusalem had been taken, people from Europe would take trips to Jerusalem, because Jerusalem still is this like considered this super holy land. So people wanted to take pilgrimages there, and it was incredibly dangerous because the entire routes like leading up to Jerusalem were still under Muslim control. And the Knights Templar were responsible for protecting people who were going from Europe to Jerusalem. It was their job to make sure they didn't get killed or robbed and all that. They were actually, even though they were an arm of the Catholic Church, they were created by a French nobleman who was affiliated with the Catholic Church. He put up all the funds to like train all these dudes and like give them really cool gear and like horses and shit, and give them all their stuff to actually go out there and do the thing. Yeah, but they would eventually become much more than just bodyguards for Europeans on this pilgrimage to Jerusalem. I don't know why I can't say Jerusalem. Part of their rise to power was due to their code, which was referred to as the rule. And their code was a lot similar to like nuns and monks and other monastic sort of entities, where they like wore really simple things. Like their attire was just like all white with a big red cross on their chest. That's all they were allowed to wear. And like anything beyond that was considered arrogant. They didn't have sex. They weren't allowed to date They weren't allowed. So yeah, like I said, it was a lot like being a monk or a nun. Obviously, because they were an arm of the church. Their whole system had a hierarchy. There was like a master at the top. So like it was kind of set up like a military where there's like the warlords at the top and then everything below them. So you have like I'm not even going to pretend like I understand military ranking systems, but you have like the master chief, the dude at the top, and then you have like your commanders and then your just peons or whatever at the bottom. And it was like a top down sort of like pyramid type system that they operated under. Church services were mandatory. Also in their code, they were not permitted to retreat from battle. Sorry, excuse me. So this small thing just being incorporated into their code made it to where they were a force to be reckoned with. So during the Crusades, they became famous for their prowess in battle and their unrelenting tactics in fighting. And they had intense discipline and training every day. So think about, you're waking up, you're going into church service. After that, you're sword fighting and you're riding on the back of a horse with a bow and arrow and you're training. That was pretty much what they did all day, every day. And at first, they definitely were just like a means to an end. Like the Catholic Church said, we need these people to kind of be our force, our actual like military force, and that's what they were. That's what they started to become. They started as bodyguards. They started as like helping people on this pilgrimage, and then they became more and more ruthless and more not ruthless. They became more and more trained and more tactical, and started to be renowned across Europe. So royalty throughout Europe wanted the Templars removed completely because obviously they were like, yo, these people are a threat. These people are a threat to our power, because Europe at the time and throughout all of history has had a really tumultuous power struggle for land and for resources. So because of their relationship with the Catholic Church, the Templars sort of operated above the law in most parts of Europe. They didn't have to follow laws. They didn't have to worry about any sort of like border control. They worked as this sort of like European police, and their whole privilege was sort of delicately intertwined with the Pope. The real true master warlord behind the Knights Templar at the time was the Pope. So they were just kind of running amok throughout Europe, doing whatever they wanted. Obviously, they got more and more powerful, and they, with their power came this privilege where they were entitled to any of the spoils of war while fighting the Muslim armies. The Templars used their war spoils to further fund their forces and strengthen their armies, and they didn't pay taxes. So they're moving throughout Europe. They are kind of operating above the law. They're accumulating all of this mass from their war spoils. Whether the wars were actually sanctioned by the Pope or not started to not really matter to a lot of them. They were like, I don't want to say they became Vikings, but they got a little Viking-esque where they're just like, they got stuff, let's take it, So behind the scenes anyway, this is where the conspiracy aspect of it comes. They got so big, they got so powerful that people, started to be like, what are they doing? How did they get all this influence? How are they so powerful and so wealthy? And a lot of it came because of the privilege that the Pope allowed them to have. So they also developed a banking system, which I thought was really interesting. And from what I could find, it was like one of the most, or one of the earliest forms of the banking system. So that what they would do, because they would get like, even though they were really powerful and strong, people would catch wind of like, okay, there's going to be these 10 Templars that are transporting like all this gold or something, and they'd bandits would like plan to steal all this gold. Sorry, I had to cut the mic for a sec. I don't know why, but I live in the city and I'm not really close to train tracks at all. And I've not ever really heard trains here at all. I don't even live on like the outskirts of the city. I live like in the city, and the closest train is like very far away from me. So I was in the middle of talking about this banking, and all of a sudden it was like, I don't know. Maybe they put a train track in like in my alley, and I missed it. I just completely missed it. I was like, damn, there's trains out there. But anyway, I have further derailed myself. So we were talking about the Knights Templar. They developed this system of banking where they opened up banks all over Europe, and they would deposit money into a bank, and then the bank would give them a ledger that says you have this amount of money, and they would travel to another bank and then withdraw the money, and everything was on the books. And it was one of the like earliest systems of like banking in that way, or like credit loans and credits like that. So I don't want to say they invented that, but kind of the modern version of it. And then they started offering this service of banking to very high-end clients, of depositing money in a Templar bank and then receiving a letter or credit at another Templar bank. And the banks grew and slowly began to entrust people. The banks grew, and these high-end clients and like other people started to entrust the Templars with their wealth, all from all different countries throughout Europe. So the Pope also used the Templars as tax collectors, and they were known for their efficiency. So like, gets a little mobby, gets a little mob-esque, you know? The ironic thing is that with their code of rule, the knights were supposed to embrace poverty. That was part of their code of rule, as being like monastic, being simple, and being not connected to worldly possessions. So while their code directly told them, don't worry about money, they were accumulating all this money throughout Europe. And I just think that that's really crazy, super, super hypocritical. So at the same time, people were donating money to them, because since their influence had grown with the Catholic Church, people had started giving them money to save their soul. So instead of like going to church, they'd just give like the Templars money, and they'd be like, okay, my services or my money's going towards the Catholic Church, and like my soul's debt has been given, and now if I die tomorrow, which was a thing, it's a thing now, but back then it was very much more of a concern for people that like, hey, might just walk out my house tomorrow and, either contract a sickness that will kill me within a week, or I'll get like, someone will cut my head off with a sword. These were very like real problems. So people would donate money to them to save their soul. And sometimes the donations weren't even in forms of money. They were in forms of land. So the Knights Templar people would be like, I really want my soul to be safe. I'm going to donate, 10 acres of land to the Knights Templar. And the Knights Templar would use the land to like farm or create vineyards. And this increased their wealth even more. So they're like balling out at this point. They have all the weapons, all of the authority, all of the money. And it's just crazy. They started off as these bodyguards going back and forth from Europe to Jerusalem, different parts of Europe to Jerusalem, and now they're like kind of running Europe. So because of this, at their peak, they would also wind up owning land all across Europe and parts of northern Africa. So eventually they bought an entire island, Cyprus Island, from the King of England. The people who lived on the island really did not like them because it was like the epitome of imperialism, where they're like, yo, you're coming in to live on our island. We don't know you. But the Templars were like, we're the government now. So like, listen to us. And they were like, nah. So they were going to stage this overthrow. All the people on the island banded together and they were going to try and massacre the Templars. But the Templars got wind of this and instead started massacring the people on the island. So it was like, do what we say or die, basically. And it got so like heated and so crazy on the island that they eventually gave the island back to the King of England, even though they still maintained a lot of like the assets that the island produced, which is just wild. They were about to, the Catholic Church and this arm of the Catholic Church was working on total like global domination, which happened throughout history over and over with different entities and different like in different forms. Like countries try to spread and take over, and countries still try and spread and take over. It's wild. So their power and connections to the king and political figures grew, and they would eventually start helping to fund other military operations for kings and countries throughout Europe. So not only do they work with the Pope and the Catholic Church to increase the influence of the church and the reach of the church, they start to work with other kings around Europe to like sort of entangle the Knights Templar into their affairs and get their own reach even further. So at this point, they've just kind of become their own bosses. Like the Pope sort of started them, but the Pope's like, it's kind of out of the Pope's hands at this point. He's like, damn, y'all are taking over. So by the end of the 12th century, Muslim armies started to take the Holy Lands back over, and support for the Crusades started to dwindle. And so people are like, yeah, okay, maybe we should let the Muslims have Jerusalem back. We've been fighting all these wars and stuff, and so maybe we could do away with the Knights Templar. Like, we don't really need them anymore, right? And people started to question the intentions of the Templars and started to fear the influence that they were gaining across Europe. And King Philip IV decided to take the Templars down. And in 1307, he went around France arresting Templars and torturing them until they, quote, confessed their sins, which, is just an easy way of saying, like, we caught them and they said that they did these terrible things, so now we can punish them. Which they probably did do terrible things, or they absolutely did do terrible things. Probably not all of them, but like a huge chunk of them. They were balling out at this point. They were just kind of doing whatever the fuck they wanted. In 1312, the Pope was finally convinced to dissolve the Templars, and a few dozen more Templars were executed for their confessions of their sins. So now these Templars are being publicly executed. The calls out by the Pope, the calls out by King Philip IV to not only dissolve the Templars, but to say, if you still wear the white garb and the red cross, and you say you're a Templar and you work with their influence, then you will be hunted and executed, because they got so big. And they did have so much influence behind the scenes that it wasn't really like in the name of the Catholic Church. They grew out of that and they started to have their own secret intentions behind the scenes that scared other countries and scared other kings, and they shut them down. So although their history is laid out pretty well, they're still, they still constitute as a secret society. They operated publicly, they were known, but they continually sought privacy. And they had countless operations outside of their public affairs. So that's kind of why I picked them. There was, a lot of information regarding them. There was a lot of information about what they did, but there was a lot of information about what they didn't do. And there are a lot of books on the Templars, and I might take an even deeper dive after this, after like learning a lot about them and kind of like doing a small deep dive, I kind of want to know a little more. They had secret initiation rituals and were scrutinized for their secrecy. Many theories arose about satanic doings and anti-Christian practices, which, whether or not those are true, are, no one will probably know. They could have been totally just rumors that other people in positions of power that feared them wanted to start to dwindle their influence across Europe. And what better way than to say that they were working for the Pope but were acting under satanic pretenses. So by the early 14th century, they were mostly dissolved. Their involvement in history since has been debated and pondered. So, like I said earlier, some believe that they quote dissolved and went on to create all of these other secret societies that still linger today and still have their roots in the Knights Templar today. Some people think they had enchanted items. So some people think that on their crusades they were able to get the Holy Grail and the Shroud of Turin and all of these other things like the Ark of the Covenant and stuff like that, and that is there are theories that that's how they derive their powers, because they went on these holy crusades, obtained these enchanted items, and it gave them this power. When in reality, they probably had none of that stuff. Maybe they did. I don't know. I'm just spitballing. They probably trained really freaking hard to be balling out. I read this thing about them being super, super skilled on horseback with bow and arrows. So their cavalry was really top shelf. And I know that that's how Genghis Khan and all of his people were able to get so much of Eurasia, was they had horseback riders that were really good with bow and arrows. And they were trying to take over the world too. It's history repeating itself. But anyway, that was my deep dive on the Knights Templar. Secret societies are crazy. I picked the Knights Templar because they're like the Walmart of secret societies. They're the biggest. There's the most information about them. And I think there's way more of a deeper dive I could go on this, but I could speak hours on secret societies, on the more modern nefarious ones that are most likely controlling certain aspects of world politics behind the scenes, and stuff like that. But that might be a whole different subject that I think I might do in the future down the line, is a podcast where, not a separate podcast, but an episode where we kind of dive into that a little bit more. I just thought it would be fun to do a little history lesson on one of the biggest secret societies out there. Yeah, so once again, thank you. Let me make sure I'm getting your name right. Joshua Hebert. Thank you for the question. Really, really appreciate that. That was a great question, and it offered a lot of conversation. It offered me a lot of rambling and conversation with myself and to y'all. Question 2 comes from Molasses Jangles over on Instagram. And it reads, one question I ponder often is how to deal with the natural ebbs and flows in the creative process, how to keep from self-critiquing for not creating while when in the ebbs, and how to maintain healthy life balance when hit with the heavy creative flows. That's a really good question. So I think all creators, myself included, get down on themselves about not feeling good enough, or they think that they are on the wrong path, or that they don't stack up to other artists that they admire or other artists in their lives. And I had this really epiphany moment in my life, or not, it wasn't even an epiphany. I guess that's the wrong word. I had this aha moment in my life in the 3rd grade with my teacher, Mrs. Riley. So if you're Mrs. Riley, if you're out there and you're listening, thank you for this. I don't even know if for some reason you're out there, hit my line because I want to send you a care package. So thank you for this. But anyway, when I was a little kid, I was always comparing myself to other kids, and I was always thinking like I wasn't good enough, and that I was like, my self-esteem was like absolute zero. I had no self-esteem. I like kind of hated myself. And I had this teacher, like Mrs. Riley, take me aside, and she would like hear me because I was a weird kid and I'm a weird adult. And I would like say stuff out loud like, man, I'll never be like these other kids. This is such and such is so much smarter than me, or like they're so much more athletic. Like, why? And I would get up down on myself, and she like pulled me aside and really like talked to me. She like looked me directly in my eyes like I was an adult. And she was like, you are special and you are unique, and you cannot compare yourself to other people because you are you, and that no one will be like you. No one will be as special and real as you. And you're doing yourself a huge disservice by comparing yourself to them. Just figure out what about you that you love, and love yourself. And that has stuck with me my whole life. It was like a really real moment for me. And it was cool because like I don't remember all of the circumstances. It was like the other kids had gone out to recess, and for some reason I was like doing indoor recess. I don't know why, but I was like trying to get this like report done or get this thing done. And I was like, she could like hear me getting like down on myself, like talking about like, oh man, I'll never get this done, or like I'll never do this the way other people are doing it. Why am I so stupid? So she took the time to really like let me know that you're not stupid, and you're not, you're good enough. You need to like look at what makes you special and unique, and focus on those aspects of yourself and those aspects of your life, and learn to love those pieces of yourself. So I think that that's a really, not to get too off topic from the question, but I think that remembering that can be really helpful when you get hit with the ebbs of the creative process, because you can sort of like lose track of why you started doing the thing in the first place, and you can get lost in comparing yourself to other people. And that's like not to say you shouldn't critique yourself or you shouldn't grow, because I think critiquing yourself is really important to get to self-critique and have others critique you in a constructive way, because that's part of growth, and that's part of being a human is not being is being able to say there is room to grow here. It's a big piece of it. And don't get trapped. Another thing is, don't get trapped in the idea that you need to be perfect, or that a project you're working on needs to be perfect. Sometimes you just need to set things free and let the world enjoy them. You can't always like refine something to this standard that you think it needs to be, because sharing art isn't about like sharing your magnum opus, and it's more about sharing this growth and sharing this piece and this fragment of the human experience that you're in right now. Also, on the flip side of that, don't be afraid to or I guess not on the flip side, but another piece of that is, don't be afraid to abandon a project. So sometimes you can get really wrapped up into something and be like, this is so great, and this is so this or that, and then you revisit it maybe like a week later. You put it down, whether it's a painting or a piece of music or poetry or whatever it is, landscaping project, whatever your craft is, you can come back to it and be like, what was I thinking? But you'll still have this like urge to sort of finish it. And I think abandoning projects can be really powerful, because it allows you to take what you needed from that creation and apply it to new creations. And sometimes just like capturing an emotion or capturing a thought is so much more potent than trying to completely flesh out this thing that you think is really potent. Sometimes it's like the small little things that you don't think are going to hit people in the way that they do. They do wind up hitting people in the way that they do because you were able to let yourself go and let another project be, realize that wasn't capturing an emotion, but take a skill from that project into a new project that does. Does that make sense? I don't know. It's crazy when you start talking about art and start talking about the creative process, but just learn to grow, learn to show up every day and learn to let things go as well. So the second half of the question is, how do you maintain a healthy life balance when you're hit with the flows? So I think that balance is key in all situations. And you really want to work on not burning yourself out. So I try not to think about putting in like 10-hour days all the time, or like putting in so much time that I'm just going to I'm just going to wake up, crush this, and it's going to be awesome. Because most of the time sometimes when you get into like some really technical stuff and you're like working on really like final details of things, sometimes that can be a vibe, but a lot of the times you're going to burn yourself out doing that, especially in the like creative portion, the creation portion of a project. So like I said, just focus on being there every day. Show up and work every day, whether it's for 2 hours, whether it's for 30 minutes, whether it's for 6 hours, but don't like try and rush the creative process, because you're going to learn slowly and you're going to develop techniques over time. And then through using those techniques to encapsulate a part of your experience, something really beautiful is going to emerge from that. And I think that can be hard to do. It can be hard to stay in that headspace when you're really like wanting to share a thing. So don't be afraid to take your time. I personally only share like a really small percentage of things. So like all of the music specifically that I've ever shared is only like 30 to, it's like maybe like 40%. And the rest is just like, I have folders and folders of just like on my computer of like exercises and beats that will never, I don't want to say ever, but like I don't have any intention of ever sharing. They're just like growth projects. So give yourself growth projects. If you're working on drawing and you're like, man, I really suck at drawing hands, just like get a notebook and start drawing hands. Be like, this is my hand book. And every day just draw like a hand in a different pose. Try to just grow and be free with it. And if you do feel completely burned out, take a break and get inspired and sort of like realign your perspective, because you can't like keep pulling from a pool of inspiration if you're uninspired. You have to like have inspiration periods. And sort of alternatively to that, if you are so uninspired that you can't do the thing, just start doing the thing without any intentions, without any regard for finishing a project. And then oftentimes when you start getting in there, you'll like want to keep going. So if you've like hit the burnout phase, you're taking a break and you're like, man, I really need to get back into that. If you just get back into it without having like expectations, you'll really find that like you'll find like a new sense of peace with the thing. Whatever I keep saying the thing, but like whatever your artistic endeavor is. So it's all really, it all comes back to like balance. And all situations come back to balance. What I like to do with goals and figuring out a way to balance life is I like to turn my goals into lists And then I like to turn those lists into like smaller lists and then like knock out things one at a time. So figure out what getting from A to B looks like, and then figure out all of the nodes in between A to B. Like, what are those sort of like macro steps, and then figure out the micro steps between the nodes to get to your destination. And then along that journey too, you'll find other passions and other skills and other paths that you didn't even know you were interested in taking too. So yeah. And also it feels really good to cross things off of a list, like a physical, tangible list. Like if you write it down and cross it off, it feels good. And also, I just wanted to say about like social media and stuff is super anxiety inducing, and it can give you a panic attack because you see everything everyone is creating and you see everyone else like, quote, succeeding, it can make you feel like inadequate or weird about your creations, but you shouldn't feel that way because people online are sharing the best version of themselves and the best versions of their creations. They're not sharing like very rarely you'll see people get down to the nitty gritty and like share a video where it's like, this is what it took to get this done. And it's like, wow, those are really inspiring videos to me. But oftentimes you just see like this finished, polished, really cool thing. And it can make you think like, oh shit, I'm fucking up. I'm not working fast enough. I'm not working hard enough. And in reality, you probably are. It's just when you get inundated with an endless scroll of these pristine finished products, it can make the whole creative process feel intimidating. So don't be on social media so much. That's a big piece of it too. I mean, social media is great. It's another thing that has balance. It's how you find other artists and it's how you find other things, but it also has a darkness to it as well. I always joke and say like staring into the rectangle of sadness, but it's not really that. It's not really a rectangle of sadness. It can be. So one last little thing on this is people aren't going to forget about you. They know that creating things takes time, and people who are truly willing to be there with you on your journey are willing to wait for you to create your next thing. Like this podcast has taken, I think between this one and the last one, it's been weeks because I have other endeavors and I just have life, and people are going to follow. The people who want to be there for your journey are going to be there with you. So take the time that you need. The most important thing is that you keep creating and keep moving forward. Thanks, Molasses Jangles. I really appreciate the time and the energy you put into that question. It was very well thought out, and I thank you. I did this on the first episode, and I thought it would be really cool to sort of continue the tradition of doing a fun fact at the end of an episode. And this fun fact, I thought, tied in really nicely with the second question of the podcast about the creative process and creating. It has to do with the Olympics, and that between the years of 1912 and 1948, the Olympics actually handed out medals for things like painting and sculpting and architecture and literature. So there was this guy in 1912 named Walter Winan, who had already won 2 Olympic medals for sharpshooting, who won the first gold medal for the arts in the Olympics. And he won it in Stockholm for a 20-inch tall horse pulling a small chariot. And the sculpture was made out of bronze, of all things. He won the gold medal for a bronze sculpture. He named it American Trotter. So back when they were still doing arts in the Olympics, all of the pieces had to be, all the pieces that were submitted had to depict some sort of sport. So in one way or another, it had to be sports related. you can actually see most of these pieces of art online. And I was like pretty blown away by how good they were. Not that I expected. I don't know. These are like people operating at like peak physical prowess. And I don't know why I just like, in my mind, like before I looked at them, I was like, they'll probably be all right. Like, you know, but they look like they're astounding. I was like, whoa. This guy, and I'm gonna butcher his last name, but this guy, Baron Pierre de Coubertin, founder of the International Olympics Committee, saw art competition as an integral part of the Olympic competitions. He felt that in order to have the games in modern times, it would be unfair not to include aspects of the arts. And actually, they used to be, even before modern times, back in Greece, they were paralleled with the athletic competitions. So it was like they were just as important. Artistic competitions in ancient Greece were just as important as physical competitions. They paralleled each other. But this guy, Baron Pierre de Coubertin, Coubertin, French, had a really rough time getting this point across to the modern Olympic organizers. A lot of people weren't super thrilled on, people came from far and wide to watch people wrestle and watch people play like sports. And they were like, I don't know if we can really sell tickets to this thing if people are going to come and watch people like recite poetry or like show off a sculpture. World War II happened. And in 1940 and 1944, the Olympics were put on hold because of the war. And when the Olympics did resume, they had a new head of the International Olympic Committee. So our French friend, Baron Pierre, was no longer in charge of coordinating the Olympic events. And this new dude, this American named Avery Brundage, he didn't like the idea of the arts being involved with the Olympics because he wanted to keep the Olympics, quote, completely pure and not to be swayed by the weight of money. So his quote was, artists inherently rely on selling their work for their livelihood. And because winning an Olympic medal could theoretically serve as a sort of advertisement for the quality of an artist's work, he didn't want artists, art in general, to be in the competitions with physical competitions. So he put an end to it. But he was a hypocrite because in 1932, he submitted a piece of literature in the Olympic Games himself. So at one point he was like, yeah, okay, I guess he probably was like, I want to be involved with the Olympics, but I have to also, I'm expected to also submit this piece of art, or I don't know. But either way, he's a hypocrite and kind of a douchebag. So after much debate, after this Avery Brundage gentleman got in charge, the arts were taken out of the Olympics after World War II. But like I said, you can see most of these pieces of art online. If you just go into a search engine and look for it, you'll find them. And they're really cool. There were some cool ones that were like of sharpshooters. There were all kinds of like poems and all kinds of paintings of swimmers, paintings of runners. I don't know if I didn't hear any like pieces of music. No one had like an audio, like an old audio file of that or anything, but maybe that's out there. If you stumble upon that, please send it my way because I would love to hear it. Either way, I think we should bring them back. I'm going to start a movement, bring back the Olympic Artistic Games or the Olympic Artistic Competitions, because Baron Pierre had a vision and I want to see it actualized once again. And that's pretty much it. That's pretty much the podcast. I want to thank all of you for listening to episode 2. The podcast is still, like I said, evolving. It's still changing. I'm still finding my where I'm going to land, but I like this format. Like I said, if you have a question or a musing or a thought that you want to hear discussed on the podcast, send it to any of my social medias at Mount Analogue, MT_ANALOGUE. I would love to hear any critiques, any advice, anything whatsoever. So send it my way. And like I said, I am on Patreon. You don't have to go there. Listening is enough. Sharing the podcast, telling your friends about the podcast. I think you can like rate it on like Apple or Apple Podcasts or something like that. So I think that helps other people discover it. So if you are listening on Apple Podcasts, give it a rating or something. Say something nice. Make me feel good. Make me feel nice. But I appreciate all of your time, and I hope that I helped to brighten your day, or I hope that I helped you shorten your car ride or helped you in some way. Thank you so much for listening, and remember to check on your mental health and check on the mental health of your loved ones. Until next time, infinite love.
Thoughts. Analog thoughts.
Analogue Thoughts.
Analog thoughts. Analog thoughts.
Analogue Thoughts. Analogue Thoughts. Analogue Thoughts.